Good evening, and welcome to the annual Henry S. Jennings Jr. Lectureship tonight. There is no commercial support for today's activity. The speakers and planners have disclosed no relevant financial relationships with any commercial interests. Please remember to answer the survey evaluation after tonight's activity. You will see the link to the evaluation in the Q&A and also at the on the video description. I would like to introduce Dr. John Dalzell, who is the Vice President for Medical Education and the Designated Institutional Official for NGHS. Dr. Dalzell.
Thank you, Dr. Kruer. Good evening. Thank you, Jennifer, for that introduction. It's so great to be here. It feels a lot different because we don't have lots of people here in physicalness here in the auditorium, but I know we got lots of people out in the electronic world, so welcome. As Jennifer said, I'm Dr. John Dalzell, and I am the Carol Burrell Professor of Medical Education for Northeast Georgia Health System, and I'm the Vice President for Medical Education and the Designated Institutional Official for NGHS. It's my privilege to welcome you to the second annual Henry S. Jennings Jr. MD Visiting Lectureship in Medical Humanities. You know, we had to postpone this lecture from our original date back in October. We postponed it not because of the COVID pandemic, as you might expect, but because we had a hurricane that came through Hall County here in Northeast Georgia. That pretty much sums up 2020 if you think about it. So it's been a crazy year, but in spite of the craziness, life goes on. And we need to go on. We need to learn and grow as individuals and as an organization. This year, the Jennings Lecture is the centerpiece of a series of lectures, CME events, town halls, and even a book series that are being held to further the conversation in our organization around race and medicine. We are committed to and continuing and expanding our difficult conversations about the impact of racism in our community and across the nation. As I said last month, just because the conversations are difficult does not mean that we don't need to have them. And because of that, I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Andre Churchwell to you as our speaker this evening. Dr. Churchwell is the Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion and the Chief Diversity Officer for Vanderbilt University. Dr. Churchwell is also the Chief Diversity Officer for the Vanderbilt University Medical Center, Senior Associate Dean for Diversity Affairs at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. He's Professor of Medicine and Cardiology, Professor of Radiology and Radiologic Sciences, and a Professor of Biomedical Engineering. And he serves on the most important committee in medical education, the Admissions Committee. That's the committee that decides who goes to medical school, which is really appropriate for this conversation about diversity and inclusion. He was named the Walter R. Murray Jr. Distinguished Alumnus by the Association of Vanderbilt Black Alumni for lifetime achievements in personal, professional, and community arenas. And in 2015, Vanderbilt University endowed him with the Levi Watkins Jr. MD Chair for Achievements in the Areas of Diversity and Inclusion. Dr. Churchwell received his medical degree from Harvard Medical School, and then he came a little closer to us and completed his internship, residency, and his cardiology fellowship at Emory University School of Medicine. In fact, he was the first African American who served as a chief medical resident at Grady Hospital in 1984. My only quibble with Dr. Churchwell, and really actually Chris Bray was the one who told me I had to ask this, Dr. Churchwell, is why it was that Vanderbilt would not play Georgia in football this year. So we are pretty big Georgia fans around here, so I think you're gonna have to answer for that one. But other than that, we're so excited and pleased that Dr. Churchwell is joining us electronically, and he's going to speak to us about building diversity and inclusion, a Voyage. Please help me to welcome Dr. Churchwell.
Well, thank you so much. That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I will tell you, a year or so ago, we opened against Georgia, and I was at Dudley Field in Nashville, standing in the down in the entrance at the when you run out in the field, and I saw those Georgia football players lined up and the Vanderbilt football players lined on the other side. I said, "Oh my goodness, we are in a heap of trouble here. These guys are at least 1.5 times larger than my Vanderbilt players." But that's the way it goes. Thank you for asking me. I am so pleased to have the opportunity to do this. My great friend, Hank Jennings, Henry Jennings III, who I've worked with so many years now, almost 30 years, both starting at Page Campbell Cardiology at the old St. Thomas Hospital, and now here at Vanderbilt for the last almost 20 years, working with Hank. Just a phenomenal teacher, leader, educator, physician. Certainly echoes his dad, who I had a great opportunity to meet many years ago. My opening slide actually gives you some sense of my voyage. It is a voyage of diversity and inclusion, starting at Vanderbilt as an undergraduate, then at Harvard, and at Emory. I always joke, though I have a Harvard education, I really learned how to be a doctor at Emory. I was placed in the womb as a physician, and I was birthed for sure at Grady Hospital, and all my great lessons from were learned there. And I'll share some of that journey because my life journey and the training has influenced the way I look at diversity and inclusion so much. But I'd like to honor Dr. Jennings, Henry Jennings Jr., phenomenal man, a gentleman of the highest order. Thankful to have the chance to do this lecture in honor of him. So if you look at the foundations for diversity and inclusion, it's your own life story. If you're a diversity and inclusion dean, you got here because of your life journey and the mentors who worked with you and supported you and imbued you with the right set of, hopefully, virtues, morals, and ideas. And those are the things that lead us, I think, in our life to our life's journey, to what we decide to do. I'm sure it was Hank and his sister very much. His father and his journey was something that stimulated them to think about medicine. So I'm going to just quickly do this to talk about these great mentors. My dad, my family, my father being my life coach, my kind of centering person, the person who modeled a virtuous life with subtle instructions for my brothers and myself. At med school, Roman DeSanctis, and at Emory, John Stone and Willis Hurst. Roman DeSanctis is still teaching and practicing. He is, I think, 89. I was a med student at Harvard in the 70s, and he was the clinical chief of cardiology. Just a gifted teacher, a great bedside clinician, and wrote a great book I would suggest you get that was part of his reunion speech for his 50th medical school reunion class at Harvard Med School, called 59 Years of Doctoring. So think about that one, 59 years of doctoring, and committed to doctoring for all the right reasons, caring, knowing, that great fusion that Willis would talk about. There he is there a couple of years ago, and I had a chance to meet him at Harvard. Just a phenomenal man. So these people stay with you for the rest of your lives. If there's a message to the house staff at your hospital, that would be one. I should say, during my time at Emory, once I joined the faculty at Crawford Long, I ran the echo lab there for a few years, from about 1986 to 91 or so. And I had the great fortune of meeting Robert Ferguson. I think Bob has retired. That tells you how old I am, but seeing many patients sent from the Northeast Georgia Medical Center at the time to my care and to the care of Doug Morris and a great team of Emory cardiologists there. Moving on, John Stone. When I came to Emory as an intern and resident, I had a chance to meet John. And I don't know if you all know him, but John's passed away, but he was the poet laureate of cardiology. He wrote many books of poems. One of his great books was, the title was The Smell of Matches, which I'm not sure a cardiologist should be talking about. But John, the lessons learned from John, because he was the dean of admissions, and I was this really raw diversity dean there at Emory. I was just getting my feet under me here, and John taught me so many lessons about, once again, embedding your humanity in every decision you made about a student as you were thinking about them vis-a-vis the admissions committee. And he helped, I think, the admissions committee come around to a more holistic view of what admissions processes should be. Just a grand man. And then certainly the home, the nurturing cave that we all come from. This is my home, still there on 707 North 9th Street in Nashville, about less than 2,000 square feet. Parents built that in 1958. Robert and Mary Churchwell had 5 kids there. How we lived in that small house, I have no idea, but it's still there, and my sister lives there. I lost mom. She went to heaven at age 89 in February of this year. One of those things that happens, that happened in 2020, to join dad, who had left us at age 92, 10 years before. But many lessons inculcated deep into my cranium, into my brother's cranium. Dad's, the largest room in the house was 400 square foot library. It was the only room in the house that had an air conditioning unit in the window, which tells you something about where he wanted you to be. So he was a very smart guy of kind of getting you into that library. And that was the coolest place in August in Nashville, you could well imagine. And he would challenge us to read books out of his library. And that's where I began to understand the power of the life of the mind, which has informed pretty much everything else I do, and my brothers. Dad is a very storied figure in journalism in America. He was the first African-American to write in a newspaper in the South, starting in the Nashville Banner, the evening paper in Nashville in about 1949, after he finished World War II and got the GI Bill and finished Fisk University. Loved writing, loved reading, and wrote for almost 30 years, education writer for that paper. And a lot of his papers are now at the Woodruff Library. He was so pleased with the experiences that I had and my younger brother Keith had, who was also a cardiologist there, a cardiologist at Emory, trained in cardiology at Emory, that he's brought his papers there to be brought to Emory. But he led the way in terms of our thinking about being committed to a life of the mind, committed to excellence, committed to humankind, what you can give back. This is his exhibition that's at the Smithsonian Museum, African American Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. And it has his fedora and his raincoat that he always wore, and his typewriter and his black pencils. And he was called the Jackie Robinson of Southern journalism because he broke the color barrier. And just an amazing man who used his life, he modeled his life for his sons. I should say, because of what he was able to do and to inculcate into my cranium, he also did so for my younger brothers. So I'm a physician. I have two younger brothers, 8 years my junior, that are twins, Kevin and Keith. Kevin went to MIT and then Vanderbilt School and trained at Boston Children's as a pediatric critical care doc. Keith, his younger twin, finished Harvard College and then trained at WashU School of Medicine and trained at Emory and Grady like I did. Was a chief resident, the second Black chief resident at Grady. And we all came back to Nashville because of Dad's admonitions to come back and give back to the city from which we were born. And so for 15 years, we served here at Vanderbilt, and they've left the old man here. Kevin is president and CEO of Boston Children's Hospital, and Keith is president of the Yale New Haven Health System. So we haven't done so poorly, and I think as he and Mom look down from their perch in heaven, I suspect they smile once in a while. Another great man that really, really kind of altered my life path to be a cardiologist was Willis Hurst. If you met Dr. Hurst, you know, he's one of those people that you talk to folks who trained under him. They all felt like he gave them just seminal, unique lessons. And, you know, when he was talking to me, he didn't talk to anyone else like that. Well, no, not so. That was one of his that was the part of his genius and his educational skills. He was able to get into your mind, into your psyche, and to help, though it helped you learn how to do bedside exam better than anyone in the world, he also imbued you with the importance of knowing and caring and the whole concept of what it means to be a teacher. He informed us that doctor really at its root is teacher. And it was just an amazing time with him at Emory to learn from him. And those lessons from all those mentors form a constellation of people that are in my mind, in my ears, that get me out of trouble when I have a problem in cardiology. I hear what Dr. Hurst would say, or Dr. DeSanctis would say. There I am with him at Grady during EKG rounds with the Emory Med students. And then I moved on from there. Those lessons around administrative leadership that you learn from a chief resident are great tools, because at the time there was only one chief medical resident at Grady Hospital, and he ran the whole hospital. And so the 1,100 bed hospital, he was the chief of the chiefs of the chief resident in surgery couldn't say anything to him. The chief resident in OBGYN, you were the dominant chief. So I learned some amazing leadership skills. One of the things that was over my door of the office that was given to me by the program director in medicine, Ken Walker, the legendary Ken Walker. He wrote, long before there were books out on emotional intelligence, he wrote and placed over my door, "Andre, there will be days you have to be more mature than you want to be." And that was an important lesson. And there were many days and hours that was the case. But those lessons served to lead me on into administrative roles in medicine. And so I was asked to be the first minority affairs leader at Emory and the dean of minority affairs, and worked with John Stone and Dottie Brinsfield. So I was on my way with that. And so I was kicked off into my career. And so what are the next steps around EDI that I had to grapple with, understand, and build as kind of a repertoire or a mind or thought model on how do you build diversity and inclusion in an academic medical center? Well, this is a tool I use, and think about the slope of this line as pushing up the hill from a monoculture of exclusiveness, a monoculture where African Americans and people of color and women are excluded, as it was in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, until we had some amazing legislation take place under Lyndon Johnson. But for a while, we were excluded. We weren't part of the AMA. We had to create the National Medical Association, African American doctors did, and you were involved in just tokenism occasionally. But come 1968, and affirmative action came through, the doors of med schools and colleges flew open to open their doors to students of color and students from marginalized backgrounds. But along the way, things had to happen. We had to understand the power and value of diversity and inclusion, and developing a critical mass of people who supported that and were from those particular student groups, whether it be African American, Hispanic, Native American, Asian Pacific, Alaskan, or Hawaiian. We had to have a critical mass of students and supporters of diversity and inclusion to make it go. And then we had the 1990s where we were educated about the power and value of diversity, not just to have diversity for diversity's sake, but it increases the value of the learning environment to have people from diverse backgrounds, people from different age groups, people from different parts of the globe, people from different gender identities. And so that became the time we began to understand that we needed to adopt diversity and inclusion, not just for its sake, because it makes us better. It makes us innovate more. It brings in different ideas. So cognitive diversity, physical diversity began to be brought into our med schools and our universities. And along the way, we all have to, whether it's Vandy or Emory or Northeast Georgia Health System, we have to understand that and begin to value it. And you begin to value it, and then you begin to understand that equity is important, whether it be justice equity, whether it be criminal justice equity, whether it be health equity, educational equity. Educational equity is something we all need to think about, and health equity. Equity doesn't mean equal. It means that if you have a kid from Atlanta who is from an impoverished background, but there's potential there, there's high intellect there, but he needs some additional academic enhancements before he can attend an Emory University or an Emory College or a Davidson College, then he needs that. But in giving him that educational equity, that extra boost, that higher stool, he is able to reach up and grab the entry bell to Davidson and Vandy and Harvard and all these schools and get in and be able to perform and be successful. So equity is actually giving that person what they need. It might be a higher stool for the kid from marginalized backgrounds than the kids that don't need a school that already can reach up and grab the bell because they're from NBA or very well-supported public school systems. And so that's really an important lesson in this. Equity, we know about health equity, but there's educational equity too. And if you're able to achieve all this stuff, and this is a journey that takes many years, I might add, then you reach the point in which you have a belonging culture. Belonging means people can bring their authentic selves to your hospitals, to your training programs. They don't have to code switch like some African-American students and residents have to do to try to find their way in to be, accepted. And so we need to get to a point along this continuum where we go from tokenism, valuing diversity, inclusion, belonging. And if you can imagine Sisyphus pushing that boulder of racism and anti-Semitism and misogyny up that hill, up the slope of this line, and it keeps rolling back because for a while it was just Sisyphus and myself pushing that boulder. But in the last few years, and certainly in the context of, in the wake of George Floyd's death, it has been very encouraging and impressive to see a whole generation of multicultural, multi-generational kids of all ages putting their shoulders to the boulder of racism and misogyny and anti-Semitism, to push that boulder up the hill with us. And that's what it's going to take for us to reach a culture where we have true belonging. Guiding principles for me that I've learned: you can't do enough in the space of diversity and inclusion. Okay, it has to be part of your central ethos. Every time you think about something that you're going to do, whether it be building a new building, starting a new program, you need to think about EDI, diversity and inclusion. And the people like myself who are involved in these offices, we have to now partner. We own little, but we need to partner and show the added value of diversity and inclusion to you and your office in the Department of Medicine or the Department of Surgery or the leadership of the hospital. And if you come on that journey with us and understand how we can help you understand the value and power of it, then your institutions begin to move along and the culture and climate changes to the extent that you're moving up that slope I talked about. It should be a guiding principle all the time. And it needs to be something not just owned by the Office of Diversity Affairs or Office of Health Equity, but owned and valued by every student, faculty member, resident, and staff member in your place. These are all interlocking principles. You take one away, it falls apart. They have to be spinning in a positive feedback loop in your institutions and be thought about every day, every waking moment that you're working to build an inclusive environment in your hospital at Northeast Georgia Health Center. These guiding principles need to be front and center. Next slide. Oh, that's me. There you go. So what do you do? What does a chief diversity officer in an academic institution do? What do you have to think about along with the guiding principles and trying to share that with your colleagues and with your administrative leadership and trying to be sure that your leaders are on the same journey with you? Recognize you can't do this alone in just a single office. The leadership of your health system has to understand the power and value of diversity and inclusion and the importance of health equity. Otherwise, it really all falls off. It falls fallow. You're never able to achieve the goals that you need to achieve. So what do you need to work on? Workforce diversity. You and me, undergraduate medical education, med students, graduate medical education. I just saw your DEI there, introduced me. Faculty, and really a lot on culture and climate and pipelines and develop those partners again and focus on health equity. I'm going to touch on some of these things as I go forward in my talk. Let's look at workforce diversity and what has been my voyage on that one. I've been working on that for over 15 years here. And what you can see is with the key on this is working with your admissions committee, whether it be a medical school admissions committee or your residency programs, to help them understand once again why it's important to have diverse and inclusive residency programs. And if you do that and show that everybody is improved by that you have people from diverse backgrounds that can address those health disparities, probably more so than our white colleagues. And more importantly, the issue around racial concordance of care is so important. We know the literature tells us Black patients or Hispanic patients are more likely to be adherent to their medicines and follow up if their doctors are from the same race and ethnic groups. So we have to populate our residency programs and our staffs and our faculty of our training programs with people from diverse backgrounds for that reason solely. So we've worked at this for a while and we're down to about 15 to 25%. If you look at the top red number, this past year, we went up to 1 out of 3 of the entering class of Vanderbilt Med School to be from a diverse or underrepresented background. That's just amazing. But the key on this is that this is now done with me just sitting back in autopilot. I don't have to say much at all during the admissions committee. My admissions committee, which is still predominantly white, understands the power and value of this. And so the last 10 years of efforts is just amazing. That's climate and culture change. Culture is hard to change, but when it changes, it can change dramatically. And this is what you're seeing here on this slide. Similarly, in terms of our residency diversity program, we've been working on that one for about 10 to 15 years too. We were initially around 3% of our residency programs being populated by underrepresented in medicine students, and that was about 2003. But we really start working on this in 2009, and you can see how the numbers have gone 3 times up on our entering class. We've matched. The match has gone up dramatically. So 12 initially in our PGY1 class in 09, now 35. And we use a couple of things that's important for you guys. We have certainly our diversity office leaders certainly interview all of our underrepresented candidates that come through for residency applicants. But more importantly, we have a codified minority house staff program that actually is involved in the recruitment too. Minority students want to see people like themselves involved in that in their residency admissions process. That's pretty much goes by, that's the same as from undergraduates, residents, and faculty. And then after that, we created a second look weekend where we bring the top underrepresented medicine applicants back to Vanderbilt about a month before the match. We've been doing this for almost 10 years. We fly them back, put them up at the Hilton suites. We have special programs for them to meet the faculty. We find out what their clinical or research interests are. So the next morning, after we fly them up on Thursday, Friday morning, they're taken to the campus and they're given very much a bespoke or custom tour around what their interests are. And then we bring them back Friday night for me to lead a whole evening of explaining and outlining diversity at Vanderbilt and in Nashville. And we bring the deans and chairs, minority faculty, and our allies, our white allies come. When we started doing this, we had a yield of about maybe 20 or 30%. We didn't know what it could be. There was no data. We now have been yielding about 50 to sometimes 65% of folks that come back. So I would strongly recommend you look at this as a potential tool. We measure this or map this out by using percent URM applicant pool. We can't use the exact match numbers because that's quotas. We started looking at diversifying the applicant pool, make it rich with minority applicants. And if you have enough, then you're going to match some if you have the right tools in place as I've described. And you can see how we've gone up over the years. The curve is tilting upwards if you connect the dots here from the percent applicant pool that's become richer, more enriched, and then the number and percent of residents in our programs going up. Along the way, though, you have to keep working on climate and culture, as I've talked about. It has to be something that you have to spend a lot of time on. You can't just bring kids to the campus. You can't just bring residents into your program if you don't make the place feel like they belong there. And so we work on that around how we do faculty searches or chair searches. We have a codified process. We use an inclusive excellence lens on that. We do unconscious bias training. I'll talk about that. But involved in that, we use inclusive excellence training, where we have our search and our faculty committees that are involved in looking at applicants recognize, be careful, because a lot of women, when they have the recommendations come in, they have that more communal language, more nurturing, that's not as direct as the applications are and letters of recommendation for our male applicants. So pay attention to that and do not demote or denigrate their recommendation letters because they have a more communal flavor. How do you fix that? You have to have a designated diversity designate or inclusive excellence advocate. You create a review committee with a broad array of diverse faculty. You create an evaluation plan. You have strict criteria that you're looking for in your faculty search or chair search. You detail that, 4 or 5 key attributes or skills, and you stay connected to that. Why do you have to do that? I'll show you in a minute. Because if you don't do that, shortcuts occur. You have to post advertisements and use your anti-discriminatory statements, not at the bottom of the application in the small fine print, but up in the main body of the application or the search request. We do that. This is what we have within the first or second paragraph of any faculty search or any chair search. This is what we include. So you know it's front and center importance for us to have a diverse applicant pool and have a diverse faculty. What are those shortcuts you have to avoid? And this is where I want you to put your thinking caps on, because we're all, as human beings, prone to use shortcuts to think. And those shortcuts involve unconscious bias or implicit bias, because we're making decisions quickly. And in doing so, we use stereotypic responses, things that are placed in our heads from our grandparents, our parents, our communities. They give us an idea about people who are different from us. Those ideas are often wrong, but they are reflexive in how we use them. So you have to slow your thinking down. And we put everybody through this process who are on faculty searches or chair searches. Watch out for cloning. People who look like you have the same attributes. They may be good, but they may not be. Positive stereotypes, you have a presumption of competence. Well, that guy went to Harvard. He must be smart. Not necessarily. Snap judgments, insufficient information. Stay connected to those criteria that you set forth, those attributes you want. Don't let the word fit be used. Fit allows you to not be detailed and analytic around those 4 or 5 key things you're looking for. We don't use fit. We call people out when they use it. Well, that person's a fit here. What do you mean by that? What are the criteria that we're trying to find of those attributes? Watch out for presumptions of incompetence. Well, that person's African American, or that person's from such and such med school that was low ranked. Boy, I've had some major stars out of some med schools that weren't in top 10. And then be careful about euphemized biases. When you call someone a star, then all of a sudden they don't have to be analyzed anymore. So we don't use that anymore. Okay, so careful on these adjectives that kick you off into a shortcut around doing the true due diligence of doing the analysis of each candidate. If you do this properly and continually and embed it as part of your process, this is what can happen. This is the leadership in the Department of Surgery. And this is after about 5 or 8 years of doing this training. And so I'm going to point out a couple of things. The surgeon in chief for the pediatric hospital is Jeffrey Upperman. Jeff's an African-American guy from UCLA, top guy in the group. You look down to Harold Carmen Salazaro, an Hispanic woman, is our chief of general surgery. And there are others I can point out here. There's a mixture of women and minorities here. You have to have intentionality in this process. The intentionality is having an inclusive excellence lens that you accept excellence from wherever it's coming from. Women, minorities, or the like. So keep those blinders off. But you got to keep building climate and culture. 5 or 6 years ago, we went through a process of looking at our strategic directions at Vanderbilt Medical Center. And we knew we had invested in this very powerful engine, 5 or 6 engines that are propelling the Starship VUMC through the universe. We needed some directions to tell us where to aim this thing. And so we had a number of meetings of leaders presenting their topics. There were about 10 topics. We need to have more new technology. We need to invest more in translational research, and let's invest more in discovery, invest more in learning, invest more in patient and family services, invest more in making diversity inclusion intentional, and so on. Well, after 3 months of presentation, the senior leadership voted at the medical center for the strategic directions by which you'll be, any project that's brought to the leadership needs to touch on 1 or 3 of these major directions. Otherwise, you're not going to be funded or supported very well. And the main things chosen, number 1 was making diversity inclusion intentional. Number 1, I had 1 vote. And then putting more emphasis on design and design thinking for patient and family services, and then to invest more in discovery, learning, and share. We had a 4th. It was called Amplify Innovation. We first did this, like a 4-point compass, but we use Amplify Innovation for everything. So we've kind of got it down to this equilateral triangle with everything pointing at making diversity inclusion intentional. So the way to change culture and climate is to give people direction, give them goals by which leadership says, if you're going to be successful, to get funded, to have our backing, you need to touch on these key strategic directions if you want to do that. And so we give tools to help people do it. We'll just throw them out in the arena. So I came up with the diversity, inclusion, intentionality tool that the chairs use, and they use in committees and task force, because we all know that when you're asked to create a committee, you choose the same people. It's just a natural human tendency. So now when you do it at Vanderbilt, we say, okay, you choose your usual group. I'm tasking you, Andre, to come up with the new design for the lobby of the hospital, which is actually occurring right now, I might add. And so you call in the chief nursing officer, you call in the chief financial officer, you call in the environmental services leader, you call in the architects. But if you're going to build a new lobby for the hospital, we want you to use this tool. And it's a pause tool. It's an intentionality tool. So stop and say, who are you missing? Are there diverse elements that should be in this group, in this committee, that we don't have, to make certain that that lobby is built in the most inclusive way? So we started iterating through this process here, this little tool I have, and we have a diversity matrix that we fill in with race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, geography, educational background, age, physical disability, and other things that you think you might want to place in there. We even include if you need an artist or a poet. In the case of building a new hospital lobby, you need some aged people that have maybe a disability. You need folks that have probably other types of disability, maybe a hearing disability, to have a kiosk with a hearing aid in there, or a kiosk with people with visual impairment to have large letters. Or what about the lady coming from Crossville, Tennessee, 2 hours away, the young mother that has kids that aren't school age? Do we have a nursery area in that lobby that she can leave her kids safely, that she can go get her appointments? So we challenge everyone now at a leadership level to use the diversity, inclusion, intentionality tool. I'm challenging not just my deans and chairs in the med school, but my vice chancellor colleagues. And I'm coming back to meet with them in a few months to see how they've used this tool. This is a freebie for me. Please make use of this. As you build that climate and culture, you have to bring staff in this. You don't want to have staff retention rates that are horrible. And you want to have a place everybody feels that they're part of a valued community, right? That's the kind of climate and culture that you want to bring your interns, your residents, your trainees, your families that are walking the halls of your hospital and medical center. They have to feel that. They have to have people smiling at them, asking, where do you need to go? Where do you want to go? Well, I realized a few years ago that we needed to work on this. So I saw the movie Hidden Figures. I'm sure many of you have, about the 3 African-American women from historically Black college who are mathematics majors who were anonymous in that they were not a known quantity at NASA until the Mercury astronaut program came in place, and they helped with the calculations to get the Mercury astronauts up and back. And you've probably seen the movie. And I had an epiphany after I saw that movie. I said, boy, we probably have hidden figures like that at Vanderbilt that no one knows about, that are either staff or nurses. Doctors get enough play. We're talking about staff and nurses to build that culture and climate of connectedness. So our office started looking and digging and archiving. We started finding these folks, and some we have to honor posthumously. So we do 4 a year. We're in our 4th year. We have a whole wall of hidden figures that we have their bios and their pictures. And it's the most bridge building thing that we do that connects us to our staff. Our staff ask about this every year. When are we going to do the Hidden Figures program, Dr. Churchwell? I'll share one story. Mr. Gunner there on the right-hand side was one of the last year's Hidden Figures events. And we actually bring the families there. Even if he's passed, we have family members come in from out of town and we give them a plaque. We have a luncheon. And Mr. Gunner was an orphan on the streets of Nashville in the early part of the 20th century, the 1900s. And he came to the Vanderbilt emergency room, and the nurses and residents kind of adopted this kid, this Black kid, orphan on the streets of Nashville, and fed him and eventually gave him jobs. And as he got older, the people in pathology realized Bill Gunner was really bright. So they brought him in and taught him how to do autopsies, how to set up the anatomy labs for the med students. So for 50 years, he was the guy that trained the residents on how to do autopsies in pathology, how to help the surgical residents understand the post-mortem and what they found there, and to set up the anatomy labs. So when he passed away at age 50, there was a huge celebration, but people didn't know about him in recent memory till we found this. And so this is the kind of thing that builds your culture. And we've had a number of these over the years. Odessa Settles with Mildred Stallman created the Angel Transfer System for pediatric critical care patients out in the communities. This is where it started at Vanderbilt with Odessa Settles as a Black nurse in 1968, working with Millie Stallman, the head of neonatology, to do that. And a host of people who've accepted us. I thought this was important enough that we actually created a set of posters to send to the WMC, the Group of Diversity and Inclusion, for the 10th year anniversary of that. And a lot of our posters were accepted. We had 7 posters submitted, 7 were accepted. Only 30 posters for all 150 med schools were displayed, and we had 7 of them. And this is one people really rallied around because people see the power and value of symbols. So the bottom part of that poster was about the hidden figures. The top part was another epiphany. And when you walk the halls of the Northeast Georgia Health System or Vanderbilt, we have 130 portraits, mostly of white guys, scientists, Good Pasture, Camby Robinson, the first dean, Stanley Cohen, Nobel Prize winner. Their portraits are appropriately on the walls, but you won't find women and you won't find minorities there. Blind spot again, part of unconscious bias. So the dean allowed me to create a team, and we started researching who should be on that wall. And we started now having portrait unveiling ceremonies to honor people, once again, posthumously or who are alive, who should have been on that wall because of what they contributed to Vanderbilt Medical Center that had gone unnoticed. Sarah Sell, early female graduate of Vanderbilt, major figure in influenza vaccine. Mike Rodriguez, my predecessor who ran this office, died prematurely of lymphoma and was the first Hispanic dean. Vivian Thomas, the great Vivian Thomas, who was at Vanderbilt originally with Blaylock before he went to Hopkins to learn and develop the operation for the blue baby. So we did a lot of things like that. And this is a very much an event that the staff and the faculty all look forward to. And it once again puts on the walls of our medical center people of diverse backgrounds. So when students, med students, undergraduate students, high school students, parents with their families from different backgrounds walk the halls to come to our medical center, they see people that look like them. And that's how you begin to build a culture. This is another one of the posters that was accepted. This is a drawing I have of the metaphorical building of diversity and inclusion that I challenge every staff, faculty, student, and leader to put a brick on that, a brick that creates a more inclusive culture. And so the balloons are comments are describe various parts of the wall, various bricks that are there, from the bottom up from staff and students, and the top down from leadership. I'll talk about this a little bit later because this building is continuing to be built. So it's not just a 2-level building anymore. These are some more of those great folks that we found. We found the very first African-American faculty member at Vanderbilt. No one knew who it was. It was James Carter in pediatrics in 1965. So owner of the very first med student, female med student, was a woman from Fairview, Tennessee, Thelma Bowie, and the very first female clinical faculty member was Anna Bowie, her sister in the Department of GYN. So we've been working on this. You can't build and sustain a culture, an inclusive culture, without dealing with the unconscious bias that we all have. And we've been using Cook-Ross and a set of trainers, 28 trained trainers that are faculty, nursing leaders, HR leaders, and we've trained about almost 7,000 total folks so far out of a 20,000 populated medical center, 20,000 people who populate the Vanderbilt Medical Center, and about 1,800 of our target clinicians, leaders, house staff, and staff. Similarly, our office created a whole module on sexual harassment that we have rolled out. And now we've trained about 2,000 of our target population in that, and about 7,000 staff and leaders have been trained. You have to work to build an inclusive environment that values everyone, respects everyone, cares for everyone. Results of the efforts? Well, we've won some awards. It's good to be acknowledged. And, I didn't know that they were going to give us these awards, but it's at least it gives us some sense that we're being observed and the work we're doing has some degree of, importance attached to it, that blackdoctors.org actually have acknowledged us twice as a medical center that is committed to diversity and inclusion, and we are, and it's nice to see that. But that's not enough. And from my perch as the Vice Chancellor for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Vanderbilt University, I have a bigger view. My perspective is a 50,000-foot view of the whole university, not just the medical school and medical center. And when George Floyd was murdered, I took it upon myself to write a piece, and I think Dr. Jennings has shared this with you, about my heart is broken as a cardiologist, as a leader, as a thinker, and what we as a society, we as a medical center, we as a university need to be about to begin that healing process. The issues of race and social justice now are front and center. I don't care who you are or where you're from. We're dealing with COVID for sure. We're dealing with the economic downturn, but this is another one of those great travails that have been brought and put on our plates that we all have to grapple with, because it has a lot to do with e pluribus unum, from 1 minute to making this our country, our communities, valued communities for all people who live here, from all walks of life, from all socioeconomic statuses, from all race, ethnicities, and gender identities. So we have to then turn, as we build our work on diversity, inclusion, and equity, as I was talking about going up that ramp, we have to face the issue of health equity. And so we created a task force against racism that is made up of students, faculty, staff. And they've been working on a number of anti-racist practices, because you have to face the fact that every institution, even a Vanderbilt, even an Emory, even a Northeast Georgia Medical Center, has built into it institutional racism. It's just the nature of our institutions, and we have to grapple with that and begin to address those things. I mean, some things like GFRs and the calculation of mental filtration rate is a systemic racism thing that's been made present for years, and there's really no difference in the GFR of African Americans and whites, but it changes the dose of medications and everything. And so we put the task force together that's run by my colleague Consuelo Wilkins, a health equity expert. Her team, 2 big deliverables: assessment of barriers and opportunities for racial equity, looking at policies, practices, and culture at Vanderbilt Medical Center and the medical school. And then in that process, recommendations for actions to achieve racial equity that include desired outcomes and metrics to track progress and to implement change. So we started this process with a task force that now numbers almost 100. but initially began by scanning and understanding the challenges and the breadth of the problems throughout the whole institution, pulling back all the covers, looking at everything, being very transparent, looking at possibilities. And actually, end of this month, actually as of yesterday, the final recommendations were sent to President and CEO and Dean Jeff Balzer here at Vanderbilt for us to begin looking at. What were the work groups that we focused on? We looked, still looking at it, work groups involving hiring, retention, career advancement for staff, okay? Looking at cost of living raise increases. Have we done that sufficiently? Are we doing things that promote racial equity within the hiring practices of our staff and faculty and students? Recruiting and supporting learners. Looking deeply and hard at racism in health education, bias in research, interpersonal discrimination. Once again, the whole issues around unconscious bias and conscious bias. And then looking at our institutional structures that we need to work on, gut and fix that will sustain racial equity in our institution here at Vanderbilt. So as we do that kind of work, that building has gotten bigger. The metaphorical building of diversity and inclusion has to be bigger. We have to add more programs to achieve these ends, such as creating a patient rights and responsibilities task force to look at what patients are doing adversely against our staff in the emergency room, fighting, coming out of opiate withdrawal in the issue, looking at the sexual harassment education I talked about. What are we doing around outreach to our marginalized communities? What is Vanderbilt's role in that? We have a Maharian Vanderbilt Alliance that we work with to get out into the communities. Moving on the side and the bottom up, the staff said we need a more inclusive culture for staff. Well, I created the Vanderbilt University Medical Center Choir, 200 strong. That's our first employee resource identity group, where we have staff, nurses, residents, professors, all singing at major events. Everybody wears white shirts, blue trousers, no name tags, no power gradients resolved. The lead tenor works in the kitchen. The lead baritone is the chief of pediatric neurosurgery, and it's really phenomenal. And so from that, we've created other employee identity groups that allows us to build community within community and then extend it out. We have those for Hispanic, Asian Americans, Native Americans, disability, staff with disability. These are staff employee identity groups for them to get together, share how they survived here, learning tools. And then we embed the leadership with training of those groups. And then we connect them across to our Vanderbilt University Medical Center leadership. So it's not just to create an isolated group, but we connect them in, but they share and get together and connect and create a sense of community first. And then as I begin to get towards the end here, looking at what we were doing to come up with those strategic directions, this was my last slide in my last presentation to the senior leadership that I think delivered the goods on them choosing making diversity and inclusion intentional as a strategic goal. So my drawing that I did here showed what are we trying to achieve? Building a sense of common community that respects and values everyone here. Well, how do we do that? We need to recognize that our research to the left needs to also be tied to social determinants of health. Our epigenetics are tied to the environmental challenges that our marginalized patients have. Towards the bottom on the left, we have to be more engaged in our communities. Our staff are from our marginalized communities. Let them be the portals, let them be the connectors to our employee resource groups to the community to understand what the community's needs are. To the left, to the right here on the screen, can't do it without delivering and understanding unconscious bias and really investing in that. And in doing so, we've done a number of things over the last few years in the balloons and the red arrows to move in that direction. Remember, we're always trying to move in the right direction. We never are at the top of that graph that I showed you earlier, but we're trying to get there and recognize that it's these types of programs we've put in place to try to get to journeys in, where there are no outsiders, everybody's in the community. We're working on health disparities. We remove the barriers to care so people have access to care to move towards health equity. What's left to do? What's left to do for me as I finish my talk and give you all some time back is to thank my parents from their heavenly perch for what they have done to allow me to grow and develop, to have the type of education and support from them, as well as my brothers and my sister. No Robert and Mary Churchwell, no Andre Churchwell, no career committed to health equity, no career committed to using his skills, hopefully to try to use them for the betterment of humankind. So I'm certainly thrilled and thankful to have the opportunity to talk to you guys today. And I'm going to stop sharing to go back on the screen and open it up to see if there's any questions here, the last maybe 5 minutes or so that we have. But I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Churchwell. That was amazing. I'm going to wait here and see if we get any questions via the chat. Did anybody have a question here? I don't see a question yet.
One of the things, Jennifer and team, I spoke a little bit about that's really important, and I didn't spend enough time on, is how we need to reach outside of our health systems into our communities, particularly our marginalized communities. That's part of our social justice and moral justice responsibilities as large corporations, as health systems are in the community, and giving back. And that could run the gamut. That could look like creating small clinics in our most marginalized communities that are certainly going to be free clinics. We have a shade tree clinic that's a free clinic. It could be working with those marginalized communities and their inner city high schools and schools that could need and probably would require some resourcing around us, coming giving talks on science and medicine and nursing to try to stimulate kids to go through that pipeline into those programs. So I really feel that it's important to look at that and find some kind of central codified way for Northeast Georgia health system to come up with a way to engage your marginalized communities, because that's our role too. And we're in that moment in America where that's really important stuff for us.
Okay, we have a couple of questions here.
Okay.
One is, how did you handle colleagues whom did not share your beliefs of importance of diversity and inclusion?
Well, the role, I'll use what my father and Dr. Hurst would say. You go back with charity in your heart, and you sit down and you offer a discussion that allows them to air their views. And if you can in any way over a period of time be able to help them understand the power of diversity and inclusion, then recognize that what we're about, I'll just share this with you. What we're about in this work is very much like herd immunity for influenza or for COVID. You're not going to get everybody immunized. Not everybody's going to come around to believing diversity and equity and inclusion are important. But if you can get 50 to 60% of your medical center, then when someone does something silly, a microaggression occurs, an unconscious bias slip occurs, then you have enough people who've been committed to this that someone will speak up. So you go through enough active bystander training, enough unconscious bias training, and you get herd immunity. About 60% of your staff, your teams, your leadership are committed to it, and you call it out when you see it.
Excellent. Also, I'm really interested in using hospital staff as portals. Could you talk a little more about how you do that?
Right. I really recommend employee identity groups or they're called different names, employee resource groups. This comes out of corporate America. And because corporations are huge and they're spread out sometimes, nationally or internationally. So people from different marginalized or underrepresented groups don't get a chance to create a sense of network to understand how they can learn from each other to grow up and ascend in those corporations or survive. So we're using this initially here at Vanderbilt and now in the university too, where we've created employee identity groups, initially African-American, Hispanic. We let them choose a leader. We fund their activities. They meet, they do things around community engagement within themselves, and then we challenge them to do community engagement out in the community. So as they reach out in the communities, they become our portals for information and connecting. Best example is in COVID here in Nashville, we had a big enclave in our Hispanic community that had a high rate of positivity and disease. And we used our employee resource group, our employee Hispanic resource group, to be our eyes, ears, and information gathering and portals of connecting back to that community. They knew exactly who the families were. They knew exactly where the streets were in those communities for us to send our teams out for testing. And so that was really important. They also helped us understand, hey, the material you're sending out there is English. Some of the folks in that community don't speak English at all. So it got us around the health equity side. We've got to be more thoughtful about making certain that our communication, our paper, our information has Spanish. It can be translated in Spanish, and it made us think about also to look at, okay, so we know English is spoken in Nashville and we know Spanish. What's the other big language? It made us stop and think from their work that we found that Arabic is the third most spoken language in Nashville, Tennessee. So we had to translate a lot of our medical material in those areas, particularly around COVID and other things, for that particular community to be able to read what they need to know.
Okay, next question. What kinds of performative allyship did you encounter at Vanderbilt, and how did you address it?
I'm sorry, let me see that. What did I encounter? Say it again.
Allyship.
Like people who are acting like allies.
Oh, allies. I'm sorry, allyship. I'm sorry. Got it. Sorry. Yeah, and I think the challenge with allies is that they've always been there. The problem is it is a bit of a reach for, I'll just be frank, for a Black person to walk into a room with white people and try to engage them. And similarly, for a white person who wants to be an ally to walk into a situation that is predominantly a problem for the African-American community to want to be part of an ally. So what we are doing to bridge that interpersonal chasm for folks who really want to come across and work together, and that's how you can get rid of the bias issues too, is use a tool called Narrative 4. It's online. The University Chaplain Service here at Vanderbilt and the Associate Chaplain Gretchen Person is my ally in that. And we use this tool. It's a tool where you pair up people who are different. You don't pair up two people that are African-American from East Nashville. An African-American guy like me and a nurse that may be a white nurse came from originally New York, or a white guy from Nashville with someone that came from Mexico, who's a staff person. And the goal is you're taught on how to engage. You have breakfast or coffee. The whole importance of this is you get to know each other. So that and you're challenged to, because in 1 month you have to come back and do a report out to the group about what you learned from the other person. And the way this is done is that I now stand up and say, I am so-and-so, I'm Gretchen Person, I'm white, I'm 50 years of age. My family's originally from Sweden. They've been in the United States for the last 40 years, originally in Minnesota. They moved to Nashville. And then she stood up and said, I'm Andre Churchwell. I was born in East Nashville. I was born in Meharry Hospital. And in doing so, this allows that chasm to really be narrowed dramatically. It's the most powerful emotional thing I've had happen in the last year. When she got up to describe that she was Andre Churchwell, I actually lost it. And similarly, she lost it when I described her, because I got to know her so well. So as you get to cross the chasm with this technique, then you get to know, actually there's more, you have more in common, okay, as human beings than you thought. And so that is a real great tool to allow allies to then be brought into a situation, into a team, into a committee, into a task force. We use that a lot.
Yeah, we'll do one more here. Can you speak to the role financial investments towards D&I efforts that play in the effectiveness of institutional initiatives?
Yeah, you have to put money in it. It doesn't, remember I said diversity inclusion, making diversity inclusion intentional. Intentional means you have to hire a diversity leader, you have to start an office, you have to fund it. And let's be clear, there's nothing any medical center thinks, everything it thinks is important, it funds, it supports, right? So I always make the joke that if your minority leader, if your diversity leader at a university is the assistant basketball coach and his office is above the gym in the back room near the showers, then that person is not resourced properly. And so the what is quite evident to your staff, to your minority faculty, to your residents is, have you resourced this properly? Because if you have, then that's a show of commitment on your part. Okay. And it has to come out of institutional funds.
Yep. So we have a comment here. I just want to say from Tawana Strather. I just have a comment. So wonderful to hear your presentation today. I'm a graduate of Meharry 1997 and spent time with you for my cardiology rotation. Thank you for your time this evening for this pertinent and relevant topic of discussion.
Great. Well, it's great to. It's good I mentored her well. That's great. She's probably knocking it out of the park down there, I'm sure. That's great. I hope my comments have been useful. I hope the presentation is useful. I would strongly recommend, if you took one thing away, is to use the diversity, inclusion, intentionality tool. It's very simple, but it's very, very powerful. It's very powerful.
Thank you, Dr. Churchwell. And I'm going to have Chris Bray, who is our foundation president, will end us tonight. Thank you.
Wow. Well, on behalf of the entire Northeast Georgia Health System Foundation and the Northeast Georgia Health System, I want to express our thanks to you, Dr. Churchwell, for an enlightening and thought-provoking and truly inspirational message. Thank you very much. In addition, I want to thank the family of the late Dr. Henry S. Jennings, Dr. Hank and Polly Jennings, and the Reverends David and Betsy Jennings-Powell. Your generosity not only honors Dr. Jennings, who is a pioneer who helped found our healthcare system here in Northeast Georgia, but it allows us to learn from such renowned educators such as Dr. Churchwell. The Henry S. Jennings, MD, Visiting Lectureship in Medical Humanities continues Dr. Jennings' life's work and passion by advancing medical education. I think tonight we can also say it advanced just regular education as well. Finally, I want to thank you all for joining us tonight for this event. Your commitment and dedication to the improvement of healthcare and the excellence in healthcare in this region does not go unnoticed. I can tell you personally that I look forward to, and I'm sure you look forward to, 2021, when we can maybe do this together in person for our third installment of this lecture series. Again, Dr. Churchwell, we have a lot to think about tonight and a lot to do as we move forward in our journey. I wish you all a happy, healthy, and enjoyable holiday season. I want to thank you all again for being here tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.